Thank you for joining Cluster Busters today. We're going to be talking about traveling with cluster headache, which is a really important topic. We know that as a lot of people prepare for summer travel and for traveling to our conferences, you might have questions about how you can manage this while living with cluster headache. And we have a lot of experience in our group. I'm joined today by our board members, Ainsley Corse, Anna Williams, Mark Mazzullo, and Joe McKay, who between them have a lot of experience living with cluster headache. And some of us have a lot of experience with traveling with cluster headache. And we want to share with you all of our tips and tricks. As I did mention it when you were joining, we are recording this session. That way it will be available later on our YouTube. If you are uncomfortable being recorded, turn off your screen. Let us know in the chat if you need help figuring out how to do that. We can guide you through that process. And also, if you don't mind, please make sure that you stay muted. Because this is a Zoom meeting, not a Zoom webinar. So you can be on camera and we can hear you if you're talking and you're not muted. Please also be respectful of fellow participants. Later in the webinar, we'll have time for Q&A. But since there are a lot of people joining us today, we want to make sure that everybody has a chance to talk. And if you're not comfortable talking on screen, you can also put your question in the chat. We'll be monitoring that and pick those up. Also, if you all have any tips or tricks for traveling with cluster headache as we move through this, feel free to put that in chat or offer them to us. Let me look at my notes, sorry. We are not doctors here at Cluster Busters. We will not be giving any medical advice today. We encourage all of you in the audience to do the same. Please don't give medical advice. We're just talking about advice for traveling. We'll have a section where we talk about healthcare providers and how you can work with them to make your travel the most comfortable. But we are not going to be giving any specific medical advice today. We're just going to be sharing what works for us. As I mentioned, this will be on YouTube later this week. We'll be putting it there. We'll put that out, a little announcement about that on our social media channels when it's up. We also have the slides that we're going to be sharing with you today available, as well as some other helpful resources. And we'll be putting into the chat where you can find those as we go through this presentation. This is our agenda for today. We'll be talking about general information about travel. We'll be talking about early planning for travel, packing, and what to do on the day of travel and as you move through reaching your destination. So I am going to turn this over to Mr. Joe McKay, who's going to help us get started with general information about traveling. How are you, Joe?
Hey, how you doing, Eileen? Hi, everybody out there. I'm going to bring up the most anxiety-ridden, riddled trip I took. Was my first flight with having an attack on a flight. Got a little experience now, and I feel much more comfortable flying because of all the people that I've met with Cluster Busters and the tips that I've gotten and what I've learned. So first and foremost, I'll say, for reasons that we don't know, it's like it says here on the slide, travel can cause an attack. Especially on an airplane or where you have a high altitude. We've noticed there are theories. One theory is about the air pressure being less that could cause an attack. And recently, we were just discussing this before, we had quite a few people report in Colorado at our conference that they had a slight uptick in their attacks and that being. But with that being said, I want to stress it is not a reason not to travel at all. There are plenty of people that do travel that have cluster headache and live full lives, and it's something that you shouldn't. Once you get the information, you shouldn't be afraid to travel with this condition. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done and a lot to learn going forward to get to that point. So it's understandable. Make a plan, right? We can go to the next slide, Eileen.
Before we move on to the next slide, there's one thing that
Oh,
Bob Wald couldn't be here today, but there's one thing that I really want to stress is don't choose not to travel because you live with cluster headache. I know it says it on the slide, but this is really important. If you live with cluster headache, chances are you're going to have cluster headache attacks no matter where in the world you are. And we feel like we don't want this disease to win. It's always a battle. You are going to have attacks in life, unfortunately. But why not do it at the beach where you can, have a beautiful sunset and a miserable attack where you won't even notice the sunset. But
yeah.
don't choose not to go because you might have a cluster headache attack. You might not. And then you will have missed out. And this is true of not just traveling, but anything in life. Don't choose not to go to the club because you might have a cluster headache attack. Don't choose not to go to the party with your family. Really choose to live and hope for the best. And that's the theory that Bob Wald lives with. And he thinks it's really important. He thinks that sometimes the stress of not joining your life can create a worse disease. So choose your life. We really encourage that. Joe?
Yes. Okay. So we have, these steps that we need to take before, right? Make a plan. Oxygen, as a lot of you know, is difficult to obtain normally. But if you're traveling, it could be surprisingly easy or surprisingly more difficult. And that's going to be a matter of you contacting an oxygen supplier if you plan on getting oxygen at your destination, or if you're driving, whatever. There's things that you could do, to bring your tanks with you, or whether it's by car or rail or what have you. I do not believe that oxygen, and you could chime in on this if you want. Oxygen is not allowed on the plane. In the US, I don't think anywhere, right, Eileen? Is it allowed anywhere? No, right?
We'll dig in a bit more, but and I'll skip to the next slide. What I can say is that at least in the States, the FAA does not allow you to bring personal oxygen carriers onto the plane. And I think that's true pretty much everywhere in the world. You cannot bring your own oxygen onto a plane. However, some airlines will allow you to use the oxygen that they're required to keep on the plane in case of an emergency. So they have their FAA approved oxygen tanks on the plane. Now, this isn't like the oxygen that drops down with the face mask in case of loss of cabin pressure, like they go through every time you fly, and the flight attendants, like a mask will drop down in front of you, put yours on, and then put on your kids. This is additional medical oxygen that they keep on the airplane in case of a medical emergency on the airplane. So you can call ahead and talk to your airline and find out if they have that, and if they'll allow you to use that, not just in general, but if you have an attack on the plane. Some people have been successful, some haven't. Mark, you have something to say?
I think it's, well, I always have an attack when I'm in cycle, when I fly. When I'm not in cycle, I don't have attacks during flight. But I have requested oxygen from the flight crew during an attack. And I think it's really important to emphasize here that it's a good idea not to say that you're having a cluster headache, not to use the word headache when you tell them what's going on with you and why you're wanting oxygen. If you tell them you're having a headache, they're not going to give you oxygen. So use the clinical term, trigeminal autonomic cephalalgia. I mean, that has a real gravitas to it, and it will make a point. So you tell them that's what's happening. It's a neurological condition. Your neurologist prescribes oxygen for you to use at home, and you would like them to make oxygen available to you, and they'll bring you a tank. And do we have that oxygen? We do have that. What's it called? The guidelines for flying with for asking for oxygen in flight. We have that somewhere, right? Eileen?
Not on the slides, but we
No,
do
but
have,
yeah,
guidelines for it, which we're gonna put in
Yeah.
the resources for
Yeah.
you.
I don't want to take up any more time talking about that, but
No.
there will be something to read with regard to how to approach the flight crew when you're when you're having an attack in flight.
Right.
We
And
also have, sorry.
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I was just going to point out too. It's important to contact whether you're flying. Obviously, the rail. I mean the air carrier. If it's rail, it's a rail. It's important to contact them way in advance as well to get the logistics out if they might require a prescription or what have you. It's important to have that. Also, if you plan on traveling soon, make sure you have any kind of documentation from your healthcare provider as well. And then the destination. You want to maybe do a little Google search and find out about how where the destination is as far as obtaining oxygen and so forth. But go ahead, Eileen. We'll move on to the next slide. Sorry
No,
about taking you back
I
there
just
for a minute.
wanted to mention that the other thing that we'll have in the resources is a card that you can give to people while you're having an attack, because while you're having an attack, you're not going to be able to explain necessarily what's going on with you. So we've created a card that you can give to people while you're having an attack that explains what's happening and what you may need. It might be a good idea if you're getting on an airplane or you're getting on a bus or what have you, to tell people as you're tell the flight attendants, tell the bus driver, whatever. I live with this disease. You can call it a trigeminal autonomic cephalgia, or you can, what Horton's disease, I don't know, but I think Mark's right that trigeminal autonomic cephalgia sounds very impressive and very important and very like something that you want to pay attention to. You can say that and you can hand them this card and say, this is the information that you need to know about this in case I have an attack while I'm with you. And that can also help when you're talking about that. And it can also help the flight attendants in the moment make a decision about whether to share that oxygen with you. I can also say that on trains, I looked at Amtrak and Eurail carriers, but you can look at your other carriers for riding on the train as to whether they allow oxygen. Joe will share with you, like when driving, that one of the important things is to secure the tanks. Trains and buses also have regulations regarding this. They generally allow them, but there are regulations with how you have to secure them. And Joe, can you talk a little bit more about what you do to secure oxygen?
Absolutely. Yeah, I had my first cluster buses conference. So some of you may have heard the story before, but I traveled 40 hours from New Jersey to Chicago for the conference. And that was because I was a last minute ticket purchase and I had to go down to South Carolina, catch a connecting train. But regardless, it was 40 hours with me dealing with shadow pain at the time and an attack here and there. And I had about 8 oxygen tanks in an oversized suitcase that I was lugging around with me with my regular luggage. What I learned was to let the conductor know on the train, in particular, about where to store the tanks. I had them in a suitcase so they weren't rolling around. Somebody out there might not be able to find a suitcase that fits their tanks, which is fine. But they do have carriers, that you can wheel the tanks around. But it's important to plan ahead for that and to let the conductor know when you're on the train. Listen, where do I need to put these tanks? Because it could be a problem if the tanks are bouncing around. I also carry tanks in my car, like a lot of you do, I'm sure, out there that use oxygen to abort. It's very important to keep them secure in an area in your car. Personally, I keep it in a bag. One of the tanks in the bag that's up on the screen now, similar to that. Which makes it easier to secure because there's clips that you can use bungee cords on to secure it in a place in the car. I have a small SUV and there's a little pop open kind of trunk thing under the back that I store the tank in there. If you don't have that option, there's usually some kind of seatbelt option in the car where you could hook up to a child, for the child seats. Most of the cars today come with some kind of little clip somewhere. Those are really good for using the bungee cords to secure them. If you can abort usually with one tank, it's a good idea to have at least one. If I'm in cycle, I'll carry 2 around usually. And there are a few different ways that you can secure them. People get creative. I've seen people use old milk crates and tie them up that way. But I guess it depends on your car, what kind of car you're going to have. And the bus, if you're taking a bus somewhere, it's probably going to be the same as the train, where you need to talk to the bus driver, obviously the carrier way ahead to get the okay and figure out where you're going to go on there. But anything else on that? Anybody else want to chime in on traveling with the oxygen tanks and securing?
Oh, I want to talk a little bit about cruising, because
Let's say the cruise.
here, if you're cruising, connect with the cruise line. And I learned a little bit about what happens with cruising. If you're leaving from a port in the United States on a cruise ship, the cruise ship is required to allow you to bring oxygen with you. You have to call ahead because different cruise lines have different rules, again, about how to secure those tanks, where they may decide that they're going to keep the tanks in a different part of the ship than your room, and they'll bring one to you. Some of the little cruise ferries that slip into your room when you're not looking, and make your bed, can also drop off another tank of oxygen. But then Ainsley shared that she cruises quite a bit, and she shared with me that she has never been able to bring oxygen on a cruise ship. And so, Ainsley, could you talk a little bit more about what you do when you're cruising? Because I know you do that a lot.
Sure, yeah, I do a lot of cruises. Hi, everyone. As Eileen said, unfortunately, I've never been able to secure oxygen for any cruises that I've been on. There's always a medical facility on board, depending on which cruise line you're using. These differ in size and facilities. So to be quite honest with you, I try not to cruise when I'm in cycle for the fact that I can't get oxygen. I just did a recent cruise in February. It was a special birthday for my husband, and I was on the tail end of a cycle and had a little bit of activity, but fortunately it was enough to be able to just kind of ride these ones out. There weren't too many screamers. So as Eileen says, I think this is just a country by country thing, but I've definitely never been able to secure oxygen, and it must be for health and safety reasons. So it's really strange, because I have actually seen some people who must have respiratory problems having oxygen with them, but they are the little compact tanks that go into a little backpack, and they probably last quite long because they would be fed through a nasal cannula rather than us having to breathe oxygen at a high flow rate. But as we've all said here, please, please, please do not allow cluster headaches to stop you from traveling. Those who know me know this already. I travel a lot, particularly now that my husband has retired. That's what we want to do in our retirement, is travel. And cluster headache has commanded our lives, all of us, for way too long. You're going to get clusters whether you're at your home, or whether you're on vacation, or whether you're at the beach, or having a day out with your family. It doesn't matter. We know the unpredictability of clusters. Even for people who are episodic, we can still get out of cycle activity unexpectedly. So please, please, please use the top tips that we put together for you today and live your life. You come first, clusters come below that. If you're prepared and you're organized, it can be done. Yes, you're going to hit some bumps in the road, but just be prepared. And as we go further on with this webinar, you'll get some more top tips for traveling with cluster headaches. But please, I can't emphasize enough, do not let this stop you from living your life.
I 100% agree. Another thing that you can do before you travel is talk to your healthcare provider. You can go to your healthcare provider and say, I'm getting ready to go on this trip. And what do you think that you can help me to do to make this a successful experience for me? One way is to plan bridge medications. And if you don't know the term bridge medication, this is extra medication that you wouldn't normally take at home to treat your cluster headache, but that might help you in case you go into a cycle unexpectedly while you are on vacation, or in case you have a ramp up in attacks while you're on vacation. So example here would be steroids, taking steroids for a short duration while you're traveling might be a good idea. Another example would be if you decided that you were going to start taking Imitrex injections while you're on vacation, even though you normally just manage with oxygen at home. It's definitely worth having a conversation with your healthcare provider about what it is that you can do to plan ahead for the best possible experience in case of the worst case scenario for you with your cluster headache. Also, always travel with paper copies of your prescriptions. God forbid you lose your medication while you're traveling and you need to get emergency refills, or even when you get onto that plane and you're telling the flight attendant, I use oxygen, and they're like, that sounds like, dangerous or whatever, you can be like, no, here's the prescription from my doctor. I'm sorry, my family's coming in and they're going to start screaming for no apparent reason. I have 2 little kids. They're loud sometimes. But you can get the paper copies of your prescriptions, hand them to people and say, no, I really do take this medicine. I really do use oxygen, and I know how to use it appropriately because I've worked with my doctor on that. Also, before you go get refills, if you need them, don't leave that until the last minute. Make sure that you have all of the medication that you normally take every day and as needed, so that you're prepared. And as Joe mentioned earlier, learn about your destination, figure out where the closest pharmacy is, figure out where the closest hospital is to where you're going to be. Also find out who is the oxygen supplier where you're going, and if they're willing to deliver some oxygen to your destination. That way you don't have to travel with all those tanks and worry about the carrier being prickly about it. Does anybody in my team have anything to add to that? Joe, you're muted.
Yes, I do. Actually, when talking about your destination, as an option, I can't say for sure if it'll work out, but if there's a fire station or firehouse close to where you're traveling in a pinch, if those guys are in quarters and you're not able to get your oxygen, and you don't want to go to the emergency room, it's worth a pop in there to say hello or what have you, because there's a chance that you might be able to find some firemen more than happy to help you with your medical emergency. The other thing I wanted to mention too was about on the plane. The times I did have attacks on a plane, I had an injectable ready to go, but I also spoke to the flight crew and. In case you do get an attack, this is one of the conversations you might want to have with the flight crew when you're just letting them know, whether you're handing them that card they were talking about, what have you, but maybe more private area to go to ride the attack out, like the galley in the back of the plane might be a good example. But that's what I wanted to add to that. I mean, and I think there's more stuff coming up and that we could talk about some other issues, but. Okay, I'll throw it back over to you, Eileen. Throw that slide on.
All right. So packing. What to pack, what to keep with you and what to put into your checked luggage if you're flying on a plane, or, you know, if you're on a bus, what you want to put in the underneath section, or if you're on a train, what you want to check there. Um Obviously travel with clothes that make you the most comfortable. I always recommend wearing layers of clothing. Ainsley recommends, bringing some loungewear and changing into that when you get onto your airplane or when you're getting onto your travel carrier. Just make sure that you're really comfortable, that you're not going to be too hot or too cold, or if you do get too hot, that you can take off a layer, and if you get too cold, you can put on a layer. Temperatures in airports and in bus stations and in train stations and on airplanes and all this can fluctuate wildly. Especially if you're flying at night. Airplanes tend to get really cold, but being in an airport with all those people tends to be really hot. And so definitely choose comfortable clothing, pack them in your luggage, but also keep some comfortable clothing with you. That way you can make sure that you're most comfortable. It doesn't have to be a fashion show, although if you're Ainsley, you can be fashionable even when you're wearing loungewear, because I know that she is. You just want to make sure that you're comfortable. Bring cleaning supplies for your oxygen. Make sure that you have enough supplies to keep your mask clean, to keep your hands clean, to keep everything clean, because you don't want to come home from travel with germs. And don't forget your oxygen supplies themselves, your masks, your regulators. Don't forget a wrench too if you are coming from the US and you need to change the regulator on your tank. Don't forget all of the things that you need to be able to do that, because you might not be able to find them wherever you're headed. As far as things to keep with you, I mentioned earlier that printed card explaining what cluster headache is, really important. Never ever pack your medication in anything that you intend to check. Always keep it with you. Sometimes it's required that you have them in their original containers. They might, when you're going through security at places like the airport, they might question you if you have a lot of medication that's just all in one pill container. It's never happened to me, but I've heard of people that it's happened to. So really be careful about that, and just make sure that you have your medication with you, because your luggage might not show up when you show up wherever you're going. And that is a worst case scenario for a lot of people.
And the temperature too, Eileen, right?
Oh, the temperature as well, right? Like the luggage compartment for airplanes gets really cold. And you might not want your injectable sumatriptan to get really cold, or if you use CGRPs, they have to stay within a certain range of temperature, or they could be somewhere where it gets really hot. Don't leave these things in your car either. They can become less effective if they get really hot or really cold. So definitely always keep your medication on you. If you're a guy and you don't carry a purse, maybe consider some kind of a carry bag that you like to use, but try and keep your medications with you while you're traveling.
Yes, I believe Indiana Jones had a satchel. So
A satchel, that's a
I think
good one. I like that.
all your medications will go in a satchel if you're fashion conscious.
I didn't want to use the word MERS, but I like that word. Energy drinks, these can help a lot of people in a pinch to board a cluster headache attack. If you're flying, you can't take most energy drinks through security, but you can take drink powders. But the 5-hour energies, which are great, are little enough to get through security. So they may also be a good option for you. But there's lots of different drink powders. We find that the most important thing is that whatever energy drink you're using contains both taurine and caffeine. Your mileage may vary, you know what works best for you, but these are some things to think about. You might want to carry, if you get really hot in places, a handheld fan. On airplanes, they also have like the overhead air that will blow on you that you can use, but if you're traveling any other way or while you're in the airport, that's not available to you. You might want to have a handheld fan with you. There's a variety of designs. There's like ones that just open up and you can fan yourself with, but there's also ones that are like mechanical, they're battery powered or they're USB chargeable that have variable speeds, but they're lightweight and small and compact. And these seem to be really nice things to carry with you. So learn about handheld fans and get yourself one if being hot in different situations can be a trigger for you. For some people, you're like, oh my gosh, wind blowing on me is the worst case scenario and it's going to trigger an attack. So that's obviously not for you, but for other people, being really hot or not having a breeze, it can be a trigger. So definitely think about what's right for you there. This one's my favorite, neck pillow, and half the time when I travel I forget to bring my neck pillow with me and I wind up having to buy one at the airport. They're cheaper if you don't buy them at the airport, but I have a stack of like 20 neck pillows in my house. Eventually I'm going to be able to give them out at Cluster Busters conferences because I'm going to have so many because I bought one every time I travel. Having something that you can put your head down on or lean back on or that supports your neck is really important when traveling, especially on those long haul flights, right, Ainsley?
Absolutely. I never travel without mine. I need to have the neck pillow because they're so flexible, the ones with the little kind of beans inside, the little polystyrene beans, and they're great. So, you know, just getting it into that right comfortable position and having a good, you know, seating position with good posture is really important. Or if you're reclining your seat and you want to try and have a little snooze, having that neck support is great. Or if you're tucked in at the window, put it up against the window, you can lean on the window. Again, you know, you can use it as a foot pillow if you're not using it for your neck. It's very versatile, but I don't go anywhere without mine. And as you say, I mean, I've been in the situation where I've missed it from my tick list and had to buy one at the airport, but they're not the same when you buy them brand new because you have to kind of bed them in a little bit to your shape and they've got to kind of warm up a bit. So yeah, my strong advice would be if you have one, take the one that you're most comfortable with, that feels a part of you. But yeah, definitely. For me, I use that you were talking about the handheld fan. I use a little one that I bought from Amazon. It was about £20. The charge on it, even when you're using it frequently, it's great. It lasts for ages without having to recharge. Compact, you can fold the handle down. And if you're waiting in a long line at the airport, like you said, when it's hot and it's stuffy, just to have that on you, even if it's a trigger for, you know, for some people, if you put it on your face, use it on the back of your neck, you know, pull the top of your shirt, you know, and sort of tuck it down and just overall cool you down. For me, heat, stuffy heat, it can be a trigger, definitely. So those would be my two absolute go-tos for travel, particularly airline travel. Comfortable neck pillow, loose, comfortable clothing, and your handheld fan.
The other thing I'll say about like the airline, the air that blows on you from over top, I've been in situations on airplanes where we've been stuck on the ground on the tarmac for one reason or another.
Yeah.
And if it's warm outside, it's going to get warm inside the plane while you're sitting there. It can get quite stuffy. And that overhead air may or may not be enough to keep things cool. So a handheld fan can help to keep things a little bit cooler because it can get really stuffy if you're stuck on a plane on the tarmac.
Yeah. Eileen, could I just mention one thing, because we're talking about cool, but you mentioned earlier on airplanes have such a fluctuation of temperature, not just planes, buses, trains, all sort of modes of transport. So not all aircrafts carry blankets. So if you have a little kind of snuggle blanket, a little kind of lightweight fleece blanket that you can take with you, doesn't need to cover you from shoulders to toes, but even something that can wrap around the upper half of your body for heat and comfort. And these are really lightweight. You can roll them up and put them with your carry-on baggage. So I would suggest people do that for the fluctuating temperatures inside a plane, train, bus.
And even if your airline does have blankets on the plane, I learned from a flight attendant friend of mine that they don't wash them like ever.
No,
And so, I mean, if you want that, that's cool, but I personally like my own blanket on an airplane. So good point, Ainsley. And hot and cold packs on this list. I learned so much from Ainsley on this one this morning, and I'm super excited because she told me today about a product that I had never heard of before, that I ordered while she was telling me about them because I'm so excited. I live with migraine, so cold packs are like a huge issue for me. And sometimes I will travel with like a freezy gel pack. And they'll take them away from you at security at the airport. Not all the time, but often enough that I've had to throw away hundreds of dollars of them at security at the airport. So if you're going to bring those with you and if they're important to you, put those in your checked luggage. But Ainsley, can you talk about this jelly product a little bit? Because I'm so excited.
Yeah, I think Anna's actually put a link in for what we're talking about into the chat. So I discovered these things many years ago, and they're like gel sheets. They're sort of probably about the size of a postcard, maybe a little slimmer than that. And they come in packs. You can get different amounts depending on what your needs are. And it's like a flexible cold jelly sheet. And it's sort of they're separated by a very thin film of plastic, which you just easily peel off and you pop it on to your forehead, to the side of your face, wherever, your neck, wherever you want to cool down. Some people might have seen them before. I used them with our kids when they were younger and they were unwell and had a fever. And they're kind of advertised as like forehead cool strips, but they have multi-use. So as you say, Eileen, often because of the gel content of the gel packs, with this regulation of liquids and gels, they can often be taken off of you. These things can't be taken off of you because they're not sort of liquefied. They are a solid jelly. And they obviously don't keep as cold for as long as a regular gel pack would, but you just take it off when it starts to not feel cool anymore and put on a fresh one. But they're wonderful for traveling.
I'm so excited to get mine. I can't even
Oh, they're
begin to
great.
express it. I just think that's going to be life-changing for me. So try them.
Yeah, for sure.
If you want to know more about the SPUT method, not just for traveling, but for yourself in general, there's information about that under the treatment options section of our website under alternatives. So you can definitely check that out. Before we move on to our next slide, does anybody else in my group have anything to say about packing? Okay, moving right along. What to do on the day of travel. We've already mentioned a lot of this. Be prepared with what to tell the travel carrier crew.
Wait, can I jump in for a moment?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a tip for travel. For years, because I get caught going through trying to carry gel packs and stuff. For the last several years, I should have it handy. A high quality mug like this, and I carry it empty through security with a plastic baggie. And as soon as I get through security, I go to the first McDonald's. I get a bag of ice. I put it in here because if I go into a bad headache, I can't hardly talk. I don't like to talk. So while I'm wanting to wait for meds to take effect, I open it up. I pull out a bag of ice. I have a bag of ice pack instantly. This cup is really for nothing, but I have a bag of ice, and I'm not sure ice really helps, but it can distract me long enough for my meds to take effect. So for the last several years, I've been carrying this, and it is a godsend. It'll last for several hours. Just a little tip.
I
The-
love that tip. And I
Oh,
also,
awesome.
I also love that you brought up having a cup with you, because that speaks to this slide actually. And while you're saying this cup is really for nothing, stay hydrated. If you're if you're traveling, especially if you're going somewhere where there's altitude, especially if you're going through airports or something like that, these are really dehydrating places. And being dehydrated, even though that is not the cause of your cluster headache and it's not going to cause you to go into a cycle, it could trigger an attack, and it could just make you more unwell in general. So after you've gotten out that ice pack and used it on your head, fill that bad boy up with some water and drink it, because you want to stay hydrated. Yeah, I always go through security like this is, oh, you can't see it because I have a virtual background, but I always have a water bottle, and you have to have it empty going through security because you can't take liquid through security. But once you get through security, if you're flying on a plane, stay hydrated. If you're on a train or in an automobile or whatever, don't forget to stop and get that water in you. Staying hydrated is so important. A lot of places you can go will really dry you out. I live on the East Coast, but if I travel to the West Coast of the United States, it's dry there, although not right now apparently, but in general it's dry there, and I always feel like I can't get enough water, and that can make me feel pretty bad. And feeling bad can, pile on top of living with a disease. So definitely stay hydrated. So thank you very much, Larry. It's nice to meet you. I don't think I've met you before for that ice tip. I love that. If you don't have a gel pack or one of the jelly things that Ainsley has, like that's a great way to get ice, and stay hydrated. The steps of using oxygen on airplane, there's a question about that in the chat that we skipped over that I missed, but we're going to get back to that, and Mark's going to talk a little bit about that. And then we'll put resources in the resource for you, the resource folder for you after this. Another tip that I have, and this is just generally for traveling, leave a copy of your prescriptions and all your medical information, and also your travel documents if you're traveling internationally, at home with a trusted person. If you lose any of this stuff, they're going to be able to email it to you or send it to you so you can print out at your destination if you can get to a printer. But losing that kind of thing while you're on a trip can add to stress. So leave that at home with some copies of that at home with somebody as well, so that you can get to that. Review your checklist to ensure you have all you need. And plan what you will eat based on what you like to do as far as eating. A lot of food that you can find while you're traveling, especially on airplanes and on trains, is maybe not what you would typically eat, and not eating what you would typically eat and in the fashion that you would typically eat can make you feel worse. So have small meals throughout the day if that's what you're comfortable with, or just make sure that you bring some food with you, some snack food with you that you're comfortable with, so that you don't have to change as much of your routine. Of course, when going to your destination, plan to try the food that is there, because that's part of the fun of traveling. But just think about what you'll do if you're stuck without the food that makes you the most comfortable. Does anybody have anything to add to this? All right. That is all we have for our formal presentation, but I do want to circle back to questions in the chat that we missed. And it's going to take me a minute to scroll back up, Anna, unless you can help me out, because there was a really specific question about oxygen that I really wanted to circle back to and talk about.
I think that was about the tank size.
It wasn't
The
the
question
tank
about that.
size.
Wasn't okay.
Although we did answer that in the chat, but let's talk a little bit about tank size. We can't really say what size of tanks you're going to be using because it's different depending upon where you live and what your prescription is. And there's different tank sizes in different parts of the world. It's not a standard thing. Here in the United States, we use E and M tanks an awful lot, but I think in the United States, there's like 10 different sizes of tanks. The really little ones obviously aren't super great for us because people with cluster headache will run through more than one in an attack. But yeah, we can't tell you what tank size you're most comfortable with because we don't know where you live and what it is. I hope that helps though. What we use.
There was another question. I found another question about the oxygen. It says, could the person who said, it's from Karen, could the person who said he has asked for oxygen on planes before advise if airplanes have high flow regulators?
That was the question.
Okay, so I don't believe so. I think it's the regulator on that plane will probably deliver 12 to 15 liters per minute, which I don't think is really considered high flow, but it's as high as you're going to get at that point. And some people do find relief with 15. But Mark, you want to chime in on it?
Yeah, most planes in the US or US based carriers will have a very small oxygen tank for emergency use, but they'll have many of them, but they're going to be small. So you can swap it out when you've used all the oxygen in the tank. You can ask for another one. However, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I didn't want to forget to say that. So the mask and regulator, there will be a mask and regulator that you can't remove. You can't replace it with your own. The mask has not been used by anyone else. And the liter per minute flow is low. I don't think it goes beyond 10 liters per minute. However, for reasons that aren't entirely understood, like so much of what we experience in relationship to having this condition, even at a very low flow, perhaps it's because we're at I don't know, it may have something to do with the pressurized cabin, but I've experienced great relief, and I know many others who have experienced great relief by using the oxygen that's available in flight, even at that low liter per minute flow. And what you would do is you would take the mask, turn it inside out, and inhale through your mouth. You would hold the aperture to your mouth and breathe in that way. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Mark. I think that's really helpful to know what to expect when you get onto your airline. Somebody else in the chat mentioned about Gammacore. I know that a lot of things that we've been talking about today have been focused on getting your medication prescriptions from your healthcare provider, but there is also the Gammacore device. If you are comfortable using that and I don't even know if you need a prescription for it anymore. It's changing right now. And Anna, I don't know if you could speak to the Gammacore device a little bit.
Sure. So there's a couple different Gammacore devices. What it is they've made the old device where you can get it without a prescription now. The Gammacore Sapphire, which is the one I have, you do currently still need a prescription for it. And it can be used both as a preventive and an abortive. I only have experienced using it as a preventive. It's not my only preventive, but it is one. I have not tried it as an abortive yet.
So that's definitely something that obviously you can take with you.
Yes.
You know,
I would suggest also, I'm sorry, I would suggest also bringing the prescription that you got for the GammaCore with you, to have with you this way, in case they start asking a question about what is this thing or what have you. And if you have a prescription, it probably less scrutiny. But
Good point.
Just anecdotally as well, I recently started a cycle and I've been using the GammaCore for the first time, trying to abort attacks with it. And the protocol to use it is three 2-minute treatments and then 2 rounds of that. So you're looking at like in between treatments and a few minutes in between rounds, it's like 15 minutes. And it's, if you know, everybody knows an attack can go from really bad to worse in that amount of critical timing. So I hope it works for others. I haven't found success with it initially.
sorry to hear that, but thank you for that. Does anybody else have any questions or comments before we end? So I want to thank you all for joining us for this webinar about traveling with cluster headache. I want to thank our panelists today, Anna Williams, Mark Muzzillo, Joe McKay, and Ainsley Course. And I want to thank everybody who shared their experiences live and in the chat. We really appreciate you all being here, and we hope that you have a wonderful afternoon.